welcome everybody. This is one of the Ask an Expert sessions for day two. Um, and this session is focused around, we call it Crash Q&A session on generative AI for a lot of us who are interested in um, generative AI and multiple uh, uh, uses of generative AI in mental health. Um, and we wanted to uh, have two great experts for this session, and we accomplished that because today we are joined by Caitlin Stamatis. Caitlin is a clinical psychologist, an expert in technology enabled behavioral health. Um, she is currently head of research at Slingshot AI, as many of you know. And Caitlin is leading evidence generation on the safety and efficacy of the first foundational model for psychology. She's previously held various clinical research and product strategy positions within digital health and technology companies, including Google, Akili Interactive Labs, and Otsuka. Dr. Stamatis received her BA in psychology from Columbia, after which she was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship. She completed a PhD in clinical psychology with a quantitative specialization at the University of Miami and her residency at Weill Cornell Medicine. Welcome, Caitlin. And we are also joined today by Chris Hemphill from Modular Feedback. Um, Chris is, as head of Modular Feedback, Chris is in charge uh, to help healthcare leaders and innovators reclaim the algorithm, where big tech AI prioritizes clicks and doom scrolling over wellness. Healthcare AI has more serious obligations to patients, providers, and payers. Chris draws on experience leading and creating healthcare AI efforts since 2018 at companies like Axiom Health, VP of Applied AI and Wobot Health, Senior Director of Commercial Intelligence as well. Chris' leadership in mitigating AI biases and expanding outreach to underserved Black and Asian communities led to a fellowship with NYU McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy Research beginning in 2022. So we are very excited to have the two of you joining this session. And um, the dynamics of this session is pretty open. We really want to hear from the audience, which I can see is increasing as we move forward. So I'll just start with one, maybe or two questions, but I encourage the audience to start dropping your questions in the chat, and I will keep track of these questions, and we will try to cover as many of them as possible throughout the session. So don't be shy. Start typing your questions, and just to start us off right now, Chris and Caitlin, with everything that we're seeing lately, movements, um, about all the possibilities of AI, but all the concerns about AI. What do you guys think are right now the most realistic near-term uses of AI in digital mental health? Like, could we think about just documentation or triage, coaching, risk detection, clinical support, all of them, none of them? Whoever would like to go first.
When you bring it up, I love like in that conversation yesterday, where someone brought up that AI is a very broad term, and they seek to say, like, if I'm talking about certain types of models, if I mean LLMs, then I want to speak to that. If I'm talking about certain types of predictive algorithms, causal AI, things like that, they want to get specific on what they're doing. So I like to think about, like, when you brought up that bevy of use cases, Cesar. I like to think that there are possibilities in all of them, and what it really relies on is partnerships between people who have the domain expertise in those areas, and people that can work and deliver on it. And I just draw from experience, like, even like being on a panel with Caitlin, for example. She has a deep background in clinical psychology and understands that domain, but you didn't hear any of those specifics in my background when Cesar was going over that. But I just reflect back to my time at Wobot Health. I partnered up with clinical psychologists and research psychologists such as Dr. Trina Histon and others who I love and adore. And it was the coming together of, hey, here are some technological paradigms that I personally find interesting, and that I think might be applicable to this domain. And we sat together in the same room, technologists and psychologists, and worked out what was feasible, what was realistic, or what, like, if I was working on certain models and seeing certain types of signal, they would tell me like, we just had that relationship to where they could apply their domain expertise and I could apply that technical. So I just want to give everybody the optimism that if you're working with it, like if you're building that right engine that includes the technological expertise and the domain expertise, then there's all kinds of things that you can make happen.
Yeah, I mean, could not agree more with that piece. I think nothing that we do at Slingshot AI, right? Like, I mean, the person I meet the most with is a machine learning engineer at Slingshot, right? It's like there has to be that crosstalk between clinicians and the deeply technical folks to do any of this, which is what makes it so cool. I can't do this alone. They can't do. None of us can do this alone. Um, I do think too, like, what you're describing, Chris, is like I think that the tools, the applications that we're going to see movement on and where we have seen movement are ones that solve a real pain point, right? Like, and are just actually responding to a real user need. And I think a lot of the ones that have like been most successful so far, they're lower risk, but they're also just like not very glamorous, but they are making clinicians' lives easier, right? It's like AI taking the documentation load off of doctors, like helping with triage and routing potentially for systems that are really overburdened. I think there's a lot of potential. We talk a lot about like AI for assessment and leveraging longitudinal high dimensional data, but like how do we turn the models can do it, the tech is there, but how do we build these tools in a way that clinicians aren't going to feel like, okay, now I have like one more thing that I have to review, right? So I think it's less about, obviously the risk piece is there. Obviously, the things that are going to be deployable for, higher acuity populations, we need to think more carefully about safeguards. It's going to take more time than the back office functions. But I do think that the tech that's going to be deployed, regardless of like the evidence behind it, yes, will play a role. But I think people are willing to take risks on new technologies if it solves a real user pain point. So as a researcher, like that's where I would be investing my time is with the companies who, even if they don't have a clinician on board or they're maybe newer to the space, like if they are solving a real problem for doctors and patients, like that's where I would bet.
That's a good point, and I know there's probably other questions. I see them popping up, but one thing I wanted to add to is, Yeah, we both talked about kind of the production side, people like clinicians and technologists coming together and building solutions. But something that I've been really excited by over the past year is seeing an increase in people focusing on the community side as well. There's a company that I work with called Modality, for example, that they like before building out some of the personas and things that they do to help train clinical health workers. It first involves a conversation with health workers in a specific and given community, and taking their input and using that to inform the product development. And that was something that I always kind of had as a halo, but like when I was working on machine learning algorithms, I wasn't personally out there talking to people in the community and really understanding how these things would be disseminated and getting that vital feedback on are we solving a real problem and what are the real problems to solve. So I love that you brought that up.
I mean, I appreciate it. Yeah. And I do think, like, especially in thinking back to the work I was doing in an academic context, I think like one of the great things about being in an environment where you set your own, like, you're free of the, pressures of a company, right? Like certain external pressures when it comes to how you design your research. I think I also, speaking for myself, just had total blind spots on in terms of, or blinders up in terms of thinking about the sustainable implementation of like, yeah, we can build this really cool tool, but who's going to use it? Who's going to pay for it? I think really critically with AI right now, and Wobot was at the forefront of some of trying to solve some of these challenges is like the regulatory piece, right? Like our existing, if we think about um, software as a medical device and where generative AI fits in here. And I'm like stepping way out of my bounds of expertise to be really clear here, but like what I do understand of this and having worked in this space, like, I think about at Slingshot, we're releasing new models daily, if not hourly. Like, really, like the technology is evolving so quickly. And I think it's such an open question around how do we work with regulators? Like, what are the right venues for folks who are building, for researchers, for regulatory folks to come together and talk about how we develop the policies so, change control plans are reasonable for a tool that like we can't release a new version every quarter. It just doesn't, not gonna, it's not gonna keep pace. If we do that, people are gonna turn to check. So I think that's another big piece of this whole conversation that we have to think about.
Caitlin, I'm sorry to say it. I'm sorry to say it. And normally I would be able to piece together what you said, but what was it? Your reception might, or Cesar, was it a problem on her end or my end?
I think you're cutting off Caitlin the last 30 seconds or something.
And
Oh
unfortunately,
man.
you were spitting, so
I
please.
mean, just like assume it was brilliant, guys. Like it was A plus content.
Let's because we do have the first questions on the chat, so let's try to go through some of them. So there's a very interesting first question from someone working in small language models and sovereign agents for clinical care. Very interesting question about why is that the United States is not following a hybrid model in AI that is very common in China, India, and other countries in the world.
What do we mean when we say hybrid model? And feel free to speak up.
Yeah, Alan, perhaps you would like to clarify. You can unmute yourself and just.
Hi, can you hear me?
Indeed.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you so much. I just came back from India and I was there for 2 months and I was I my background is I worked at the World Bank and I did large scale international development projects, reducing poverty and so forth. Anyway, so what the Americans have done, from my perspective, I've lived in 10 countries, backpacked 80, 90 countries. So about 2 months ago, the electricity went out in San Francisco. And what happened is that these Waymo cars stopped on the road and created congestion all over the city. And so what happens is that the American model is very centered around a data center. And so when the electricity went out, it pretty much paralyzed the city. So if this happened in China, for example, if you buy like a Tesla in China, and we do manufacturing in China, by the way, not a cars or anything like that, but if you have electricity go out in China, your car has already DeepSeek embedded in it. So that car keeps going. It keeps driving even with the electricity off. So the American model is a good example of like if you made a basic risk assessment, you would see the mistake in that model. If the electricity goes out, all these cars paralyze a city. So that's not a hybrid approach. A hybrid approach is like the Chinese that embed AI inside a car, and the car keeps going even if the electricity goes out. So the American model seems very kind of a rent-seeking approach centered on data centers. And so I've been talking to people in hospitals and telling them, don't follow the Americans because they're going to drive off a cliff. If the lights go out in this hospital, you need to have small language models inside that equipment. And that equipment needs to continue to work and operate in a war setting, electricity. So that's the approach of the world. Most of the world takes is a hybrid approach. We put small language models, tiny language models. If you go to India, if you go to China, this is the approach the world takes. But in the US, it's almost like you're not allowed to talk about it. It's almost like a very kind of either you're following a rent-seeking approach from Wall Street, or you shouldn't be, following anything but this narrative. And so it's kind of shocking to see it here in the US. So there's different structural approaches, is what I'm saying. The American model is faulty because if the electricity goes out, it paralyzes a city like it did 2 months ago.
Alan, sorry
Okay,
to
sorry.
interrupt. The
I'll stop.
question was, yeah,
I
the question
clarified. I hope I
was
clarified the
clarified.
differences between the world and the Americans.
Chris and Caitlin, you guys,
I personally live in America, and I love small language models, and working with what's going to be the best solution for the problem. And to me, it sounds like I wouldn't say that Waymo is the American model in that example. It's an American company that made a decision on how to distribute their their models and their fallbacks, their safety fallback in case of failure of the centralized data center indicates that they didn't watch the movie Independence Day, where there was this centralized mainframe system that then they took it out and took out all the aliens. But I really agree with the idea that remember Reclaim the Algorithm at the very beginning. There is a narrative that all of the attention and all of the media and flashing lights and all that go to whatever model Anthropic and OpenAI released last week. But when working with my clients and working with systems in the past, they have at the frontier a lot of things that enable some useful capabilities. But if you're starting to look at things like if you're deploying models at scale and you're having to work with hundreds of thousands or millions of patients or process millions of claims or what have you, you're going to be looking for ways that, well, first of all, you want to reduce your risk in terms of privacy. So the more that you can control behind your owned systems, the better. And you're going to be looking for things that get you the accuracy that you're looking for without gigantic expense. Because if you're having to do a big outbound token spend each time you run an experiment, each time you test something with the population, then it makes a lot of use cases untenable. Like if you wanted to understand the topics that people are speaking about across, let's call it 1.2 million conversations, that becomes a very expensive proposition if you're using and like an external API token slot versus building a solution internally and running a smaller approach that gets you the accuracy you need. So in my opinion, like there's the stuff that happens on the headlines, but we should really look at what are we aiming for, what's the strategy, what's the outcome that we're looking for, and work backwards from there to find a better solution. Frontiers help with the baseline, but there's that backwards work that needs to be done to have a really serious solution to large scale problems.
It's a great point. I mean, I think, we certainly see the like bigger model does not equal better model, right? In our work at Slingshot, I think, there are certain things that we see from the leading frontier models, like they're built and designed to like ruthlessly keep people engaged at all costs, right? And like, they're really good at it. Right? They have like learned how to be really fantastic at making you feel good and making you want to come back and giving you a really easy fixed choice at the end of a response for like how to engage with the model further. And often that's not the best thing for mental health, right? Like I think, we'll see some of these really brilliant models do things that when you try to apply them or leverage them, and this is in the context of, conversational AI for mental health support, right? So I'm talking about a specific use case here. But I'll often see like GPT style models hand someone like this really neatly packaged cognitive reframe and like do a lot of work on the part of the user. And users like it, right? Like they come back. But as a clinician, like that type of behavior worries me, right? Because I wonder, is this the type of stuff that like really subtly, like it feels fine at first, it's maybe a little bit of scaffolding. And if we were to walk it back, maybe it would be okay. But if we don't do that and it just keeps going, or if it answers like should I go no contact with my parents question, like, yes, here's a 5-step plan. A therapist would never answer, right? Like, so there are all these behaviors that I think models have learned like ancillary to like their intelligence, but that seem to go along with being like a bigger, better model that I don't think are always best when it comes to mental health support. Um, and I'll just add too to your question or your point in the chat. I mean, I think it's first of all amazing that you're doing this type of work in refugee camps and in these settings. It does, seem like a trend we've seen in healthcare is like often the settings that have the least entrenched infrastructure can move the fastest, right? Because like maybe it's not always a good thing, but I think, in part, maybe there's the counterfactual is just so stark. And I would imagine in a refugee camp that like the alternative is not obviously a clinician, right? It's like it's nothing or it's something very basic. And so the risk benefit math, I think, is just different than it is in the US. And I think, we see this with even users of Ash, right? When we turned off, this was in a well-resourced setting, but thinking about counterfactuals, when we turned off access to Ash in the UK because of kind of uncertainties around evolving regulatory policy there, people did not turn to a clinician, right? We are not replacing therapy with these tools. 53% said they turned to ChatGPT or nothing. So I guess like to maybe try to tie a bow on like a bunch of disparate like things that are coming out of my mouth. I think that I would guess that a lot of the reasons the US maybe lags behind in this sense, like maybe some of it is not a lag when it comes to the specific healthcare application. And the reasons are maybe not so much about the technology or the capability, so much as our hesitancy to engage in, or the way we think about risk benefit and liability when it comes to these tools in healthcare.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next. And Sharon, we see your question in the chat, but you're free to unmute and um, ask your question aloud.
Yeah, sure. So mine was really about, so I'm in industry working on a clinical product, AI mental health chatbot, like many of us are. And I think, being trained as a clinical psychologist, we look out there for, oh, what's the gold standard? We're going to go and we'll follow the gold standard. And right now we're all trying to figure that out as a field. So I was hoping that you guys could talk just a little bit about how both of you think about if you were to really define, what is robust testing before it gets into users' hands, what would that look like for you? And maybe perhaps a more fun question, if you want to take this one instead, is like,
The first
is
question
there
is fun though, just for the record. That was a
okay,
fun
good,
question too.
good. But if you want an even more fun question, maybe examples that you've seen out there that are making you excited about like, oh man, that's so cool that, this is how they're handling their safeguards and thinking about guardrails and testing.
So, Kate, I've been stealing the mic the first
No,
time.
no, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah. Honestly, that second question is part and parcel to the first because and I'll use an example where a client is like they have. I mentioned them earlier, a persona-based training system for community health workers. But if you have this turn-by-turn conversation going on with an LLM that is based on a persona defined in some kind of way, there are all kinds of places where that can go off the rails and have like one concern that we were interested in addressing early on is stereotypical conversations based on demographics such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and things like that. If you're trying to create a persona that's representative of somebody who the community health worker is going to encounter, and you directly prompt it in certain ways, it might you might be happy that like, hey, I've distinctly told it to go in like I prompted in the direction of black gay male, and I identify these traits, and I feel good because I'm going to be giving that community health worker some experience with a specific person. But what you're really doing is you like it all the language model is pre-trained on some corpus of data based on the internet, and then there's a post-training process that involves people who are looking at the outputs and rating them. That's a very oversimplified way to explain it, but there's just all kinds of possibility that those patterns might lead to bias and stereotypical conversations. The excitement is like when we were first listening to that problem and identifying it and digesting it. It sounds like a extremely difficult, impossible problem to solve. But once you start looking like the first step is always to stand on the shoulders of giants. So look at the available literature out there and who else might have encountered that problem and gone through some scientific rigor in addressing it. And there actually was there was some great literature out there kind of springing forth from a paper from 2023 by Myra Chang over at Stanford. So it was great to see that, hey, there's literature that addresses this persona based problem, and this is just a specific use case. There's all kinds of other things, Sharon, that you could be focused on, but what you want to look for cues that address it within your use case, because the amount of red teaming that might be necessary for a model that's only paying attention to two or three different clinical or patient characteristics, the amount of red teaming there might be much lower than the amount of red teaming that might be needed for like a chat-based solution or something that has a much broader scope of different knobs and levers and characteristics. So when you're looking at the literature, it's very use case driven. They're like these AI is too broad a term to apply to all these things, but when you start looking into who has worked on similar problems, even if it's not the same exact problem, you start seeing a little bit of signal on how you might conduct your own your own analyses on, hey, how does this apply to my data population and scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the tiered approach is super important. And, you know, often the way I think about it, the way we talk about it internally, like I think we can bring it back to Waymo, right? Like the model, I think, is not dissimilar from how you would test a self-driving car, right? Like you cannot validate it by just driving around an empty parking lot. It will tell you nothing about how it does in the real world. But you also can't just like drop it on the highway at rush hour and hope for the best. And I think it's like earning each tier, and it's figuring out which features need to be to the like tiered kind of red teaming point, like which features need to really stand up. Like maybe, I don't know, the stereo doesn't need as much like scrutiny as the engine, right? Or the direction system or whatever. I obviously don't know anything about cars. Um, and so yeah, like every stage is important and real and gated and kind of monitored, and then you graduate when the data supports graduating. I don't think that means you have to establish 100% safety, right? Like before something is deployed. I think that if that's the standard we're holding ourselves to, I mean, nothing out there is 100% safe. Not even clinicians, right? So I think it's not it has to be somewhere in between, and we have to accept some trade-offs. Um, in terms of the fun question, I think actually my favorite, I've struggled a lot with benchmarks. I think they obviously have a really important place, and in our experience, a lot of times, by the time a benchmark is out there and published, like frontier labs have probably already built a model that's smart enough to outsmart it and like outsmart kind of the robust tests, right? It's very hard to build benchmarks, especially things that are multi-turn and that reflect the complexity and nuance of real clinical users in a mental health context. It's just very hard to build benchmarks that are going to kind of accurately represent the large problem space of clinical risk and mental health. I think, something I loved seeing outside of the mental health space was just like the big like public red teaming. I think it was like the DEF CON generative red team where they put like 2,000 Packers in a room and were like, go try to break all of these big AI models. And I would love to see something like that in mental health, right? If like clinicians were willing to come together and do that. And I think, it would allow us to find failures faster and more quickly. And because the reality is with companies, like a lot of people are, working on shared problems in isolation. The last thing I'll say to this point is I think we can only get so far with synthetic data. We've seen, and one of the benefits of having access to, millions of sessions between users and a generative AI tool is that we can see what, the real distribution of user conversations looks like. And so when we, we've spent some time building user simulators or looking at, even like clinician generated simulated patients. It's actually really hard to build realistic simulated patient data. And a lot of times, even the best kind of models for doing so out there, and even frontier models that are well prompted and trained to do exactly this, like they end up producing overly like agreeable or like easy, right? Like patient cases that just, I worry that they do not, and we've seen they do not represent, again, the problem space of risk. So um, I guess to, put all of that together, I think it has to be a multi-tiered system. It has to be collaborative across companies, and it has to happen in staged ways. It can't be like we pass all the internal tests and it's perfectly 100% safe, and then we throw it out on the road.
Collaborative across companies is very cool. Any time that we all come together, I know we all represent different companies and we all see each other on the Zoom screen. So I like to always encourage people to work across those those C Corp, LLC, whatever lines and stuff like that, and embrace each other as people who are trying to work together on a problem. And I also like that, like hearing your thoughts on benchmarking yesterday and today. And I want to encourage also, like when you're looking at these approaches, Sharon, one thing to do is to establish an internal benchmark, like looking at your own problem space and solutions and things like that. And that way, as different models and different approaches are released, you're able to you have a consistent baseline against which you can evaluate them. Because even like progress you're working with words. The words don't fit to plots and lines. Like we make them, we fit them to these Euclidean spaces and stuff like that. But that's not the truth of how words operate. So it like just given this kind of discrete nature of a lot of the types of problems that that you're solving, you don't want to just trust that, oh, it's GPT 5.5 and now 5.7 is on the way, so switch everything on over. You want the new release to pass your internal benchmarking before you make that decision. So just wanted to encourage that kind of like the benchmarkings out there are for them, but you need to work on what's applicable to your populations.
It's so, sorry, just really quick on that point, Cesar, like I think that's so critical. And one thing we have a really extensive set of internal evals, right? Model evals, so we can understand how changes to the model are impacting the core, clinical and safety dimensions that we care about. But establishing infrastructure like that is like, that could be a whole clinical product team's job in itself, right? Plus machine learning engineers, plus data, right? It's a huge task. And right now, I know so many companies are building these evals and like have again, to the point of like, we should work together on things. Like we're all doing it, right? But there's no incentive to like publish this or get this out there. I don't know who would create that incentive or what it would look like, beyond just like people who care about the science and making sure this tech like does good for the world, right? Coming together. But I do think that some like open centralized willingness to collaborate on the eval infrastructure when it comes to clinical AI and mental health is something that would really accelerate our ability to trust the tech coming out of this space.
Thank you, guys. I'm pretty amazed how each question in the chat is moving us deeper and deeper through this topic. The next question relates to concerns about data ownership. So, Christine, would you like to unmute and walk us through your question, which is very interesting?
I can. I'm in a public setting, so I apologize if it's noisy, but I just, I see there's a lot of digital tools out there being developed for mental health, and sometimes they're building their own platforms. A lot of the times they're using, OpenAI and dropping different types of already built platforms, and it just makes me think a lot about, like 23andMe, like kind of concerns where people are putting in their data blindly, particularly for mental health and HIPAA related concerns, being present, that we don't really know where it's going, who it's getting sold to. And I don't really hear a lot of conversation about it. So I'm just curious, what people on this panel, like their thoughts are around that, if they know anything or what they're projecting might happen.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the question of the hour. It's super important. And I do think the fact that, and I'm thinking about like for myself, like I'm uploading, I don't know, I'm thinking about like my kids' medical stuff, like some of the stuff I put in ChatGPT, right? Without thinking. And it's because I think the fact that we're all willing to do that, knowing the massive risks of like sharing just willingly being like, please take my data, it highlights the gaps in the system, right? And I think we're seeing it a lot in women's health and maternal health, right? Like women, not just women, but and I guess this is also speaking from experience, right? Like turning to apps like Aura and like a lot of these tools that we're then feeding into Claude and having like a Claude instance about this, right? To like figure out your own patterns because there are gaps in the system. So to me, like the fact that people are doing this, like really knowing full well the risks and that these are big tech companies and that they are clearly going to sell data to advertisers and likely others just highlights a lot of the gaps that are in the system. I will say like some things as a psychologist, not a lawyer, about, like my understanding of some of the legal stuff here. I think it is a lot weaker even than people think in terms of the protections that are there. A lot of people assume that like HIPAA will cover like that health data, but it mostly doesn't when it comes to a lot of the tools out there, even more like purpose-built, right? Mental health tools, like HIPAA applies to providers and insurers. So what you tell a consumer app or a chatbot is like not usually legally protected health information by default. So it is really important to understand, what those terms and legal rights associated with the platform are. And we have seen, fortunately, the FTC going after, I think, some consumer health platforms for, sharing mental health data with advertisers. But I think what we are protected by right now, again, in the consumer health space, is pretty patchwork. So I think when it comes to companies and like as I'm looking at terms and trying to understand if a health app is something I'd want to use, it's like, okay, are they minimizing data sharing by default? Are they saying like we don't train on identifiable data without explicit opt-in? Like that should be like the floor of what you'd expect, right? Like are they selling the data or guaranteeing that they're not selling the data? Are there real deletion rates, right? Can you request to have it deleted? I think especially because we've seen in our research that people disclose a lot more to tools like this than they might to a person, and so much more quickly because there's not the same fear of judgment and stigma. I really do think that we need to hold these tools to a higher standard and not just a lower one because it's tech or wellness.
Caitlin, so like you're on the forefront. I mean, I'm wearing my purple representing Wobot, that Wobot purple color,
Love
but
it.
I think that the baton is in y'all's hands very strongly now. It just makes me wonder about what about the people that don't even see what they're doing as a clinical use on general purpose platforms. Like it reminds me of the scenario where someone is using using OpenAI or what have you for help with their homework, and then they start just asking more deeper and more personal questions without even any kind of consideration to that clinical aspect and their health data. Are there any perspectives that you're seeing around that? Sorry to be hijacking and asking. I'm not the moderator. I'm just a very curious person.
Like perspectives in terms of kind of how protections apply or not.
Yeah, because I've seen people responding and there's a set of people that are more than willing to have these conversations, and there's another set of people that don't want their conversations going out to big tech platforms at all. But it just made me wonder about any kind of research or thoughts on people that are having conversations that could be considered could be considered seeking therapy, but they don't really know that they're doing it. They're just talking to Chat GPT or what have you.
It's a great point. I mean, I don't know the answer to it, but it is like that's a very real thing, right? I think the benefit of a general purpose platform for a lot of people is like, I don't know, I'm like asking for help with a work task, and it's like, actually, like this colleague said something really annoying, and I'm so frustrated, and like, how can I, right? Like, help me write an email, and actually, like, let's process my feelings about, it, right? It's so easy to drift, and like so convenient that this tool has the context about your life. So. Um, I think the challenge is, unlike a provider whose license is on the line, the sort of who is responsible when things go awry or, data is used in a way that the kind of person sharing it was not totally aware that they were, that it was going to be used for. The responsibility piece, I think, is still so murky.
I'll throw in just one more note. Just thinking back to Alan's introduction regarding small language models, or I would say open source approaches, like thinking to what the progress has been with those over time. I do see a future where there's a lot more usefulness to be had on things that are built on open source platforms, which can be, of course, owned by the company providing the service. So it can move on. We can move on from these kind of if you're using this API driven access, then you don't know what the underlying changes are, how the data drift and things like that. But if you own the model, then you can deliver something much more consistent. So as those become cheaper to host and deliver feedback, I do see a move towards companies being specific companies being able to say, hey, no, our differentiator and our market purpose is to deliver, to be the privacy solution for your mental health.
Thank you. Um, we are getting to the last minutes of our time together, but we have time for one or maybe two more questions. So, Jack raised a question related to the potential of AI tools removing some of the effort and challenge associated with work, learning, self care. And Jack is very curious on how you guys think of the balance about the balance of between convenience, engagement with AI tools, and effortful growth. Who would
I
like to
mean,
go first? Interesting
yeah,
question.
I'm happy to have, I mean, this is like the, again, thing that's on my mind all the time. Look, there are a couple of challenges, right? Like as I said before, frontier models have they're expert at optimizing for engagement. And ultimately, especially like most digital health apps start as consumer products where in order to, have a viable business, you need people to come back the next day. You just do, right? I'll also say from a treatment perspective, if we have a model that is like a clinical superstar, but really sucks to talk to, and people don't come back, like we're not going to help anyone, right? So there is like a engagement can't be like this thing that's at odds with clinical benefit. It's something that we need people to show up and to keep coming back if we're going to help anyone at all. I think where I spend a lot of my time thinking about is sort of what is that Venn diagram of model behaviors, especially thinking about these really smart new models. The model behaviors that keep people engaged, what are the model behaviors that lead to better clinical outcomes? And where do they overlap? Because I think it is that sweet spot of, right, like we need to figure out the things that are good for engagement that also seem to push people towards, right, like push people out into the world and to be living the lives that they want to live, but still coming back enough to, right, like sustain a consumer business. Like that is a challenge that I think when we just look at very GBT-esque models and criticize like the how formulaic they seem and how they are, and I am guilty of this, right? Like being so frustrated with how they're doing so much work for the user. Like we also have to think about there's a reason, like people maybe need that scaffolding at first, but I do think, and this is something that I'm eager to explore with our data too, is like if we know that some people need more of that like hand holding up front and maybe just we need to make that activation energy required a little bit lower at the start and have them maybe it's okay for the model to do a little bit of the work. Like is there a sort of titration thing where we can take that away over time, put more of the onus of like doing the cognitive restructuring and like doing the active, kind of processes of change that we know are required for sustained benefits in therapy, once they've kind of gotten past that initial bar and are bought into the experience.
I want to throw something out too from an investment perspective, because the challenge when you're talking about engagement, one of the big challenges is you have an idea on a concept on what works best for your users, and you know that your goal is not to have them just addicted to your application, brain jacked and following these notifications every day, but to solve a problem and then know that you're available for the next time they have a problem. But a lot of investors kind of penalize things that are not optimized for daily active use. So a lot of investors want to see in every day and everything like that, but it's at odds with the mechanism that you're trying to deliver. So at Wobot, one thing that we had to come up with was to really define what relate the types of engagement that we saw to improvement in outcomes. So, and I'm just saying this for anybody else who might be building things and be confronted with the problem on how to respond to engagement. But the overall idea, like we had what we called our vitamin users, the people that are in the application every day. But then we had more dispersed. We called them kind of painkiller users and infrequent yada yada yada. But what we were able to do was rather than have those conversations with it, like why are they not in it every day, et cetera, it was being able to demonstrate that there were heightened periods of use when there were problems being addressed, gaps in use, and then a return. So it's a hard question because it's an education that you're having to do. Like you don't like you don't want to be that next application that's fostering addiction and things like that. But we found that that was a successful way to help people understand that, hey, it's not that like daily active use constantly for until the end of time is not the end goal here.
It's also probably not like financially sustainable for companies too, right? Like, and again, this is like putting the most calculating spin on it. And there are like so many reasons above this why I think we should not optimize for engagement at all costs. But like that is expensive, right? If a user is just like using a bajillion tokens with your model coming back all the time. So I think there are, and I think it's like having to think creatively about how to align those incentives too, right? As like clinicians working inside these companies, and to be able to speak a language that, you know, skeptical investor will listen to.
Thank you so much for your questions, everybody. Thank you, Chris and Caitlin. Let's give everyone a round of applause because really the questions and the answers were really great throughout this session.